Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into, well, a really fascinating part of medical history,
Mm,
bloodletting. And the whole theory behind it, the four humors, it feels so alien now, but it dominated thinking for literally thousands of years.
it really did. It's kind of mind-boggling how long it lasted. And our plan for this deep dive, using this great lecture material we have, is to unpack that.
Yeah, look at where it came from, how it worked, or how they thought it worked, and what eventually made people move on.
Exactly. Trace the whole arc.
So let's start right at the source. The lecture points strongly to ancient Greece, doesn't it? Hippocrates.
Absolutely. Hippocrates is key.
Mhm.
He didn't necessarily invent every aspect, but he, or perhaps the school of thought associated with him, really codified this theory of the four humors.
Right. And what were these humors fundamentally?
Well, the core idea was that the body contained four essential fluids.
Uh-huh.
You had blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Pretty straightforward list, you might think. But the crucial part, and this is what the lecture really emphasizes, is that they believed these weren't just bodily fluids. They were deeply connected to, well, everything about a person. Their health, their mood, their temperament.
Ah, so it wasn't just physiology, it was psychology too. That's a big leap.
A huge leap. It was very holistic in its own way. So blood, for instance, they linked it to the liver, saw it as the most vital humor, warm and moist.
And connected to personality.
Yeah, sanguine personality, optimistic, sociable, energetic, someone full of life, literally full of blood in their view.
Okay, one down. What about phlegm?
Phlegm was linked to the lungs, maybe the brain too,
Yeah.
seen as cold and moist, and personality-wise. Phlegmatic,
Yeah.
calm, maybe a bit sluggish, unemotional, steady,
Right, I can picture that type. And the biles, yellow bile.
yellow bile, associated with the liver and gallbladder. Hot and dry, that was your choleric type. Ambitious, driven, but also potentially irritable, quick to anger, fiery, you could say.
Makes sense. Hot and dry, fiery temperament. And the last one, black bile.
Black bile, thought to come from the spleen. Cold and dry. This was linked to the melancholic temperament. Introspective, thoughtful, maybe prone to sadness or depression.
It's fascinating how these terms, sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric, melancholic, are still around, even if we don't connect them to spleen juice anymore.
Exactly. The lecture mentions this too. While the biological theory is gone, that framework for thinking about personality types, well, it echoes in modern psychology sometimes, doesn't it? Like you still see personality tests grouping people into similar broad categories. It's a subtle legacy.
So health was all about keeping these four in. What? Perfect balance.
Pretty much. Balance was everything. If you had too much of one or maybe not enough of another, that was the root cause of illness. Simple as that, in their view.
And this wasn't just a fringe idea.
Oh, not at all. The lecture makes it clear this dominated Western medicine for, gosh, well over a millennium. It shaped diagnosis, treatment, everything. Because, back then, without microscopes or modern labs, what else did they have? They had observation, theory, and authority figures like Galen later on.
Okay, so that's the theoretical foundation. How does bloodletting fit in? It still seems like a bit of a jump to start draining blood.
Well, if you accept the premise that illness comes from an imbalance, often an excess of a humor, then the cure seems almost logical, doesn't it?
Oh, I guess.
Especially for blood. It's the most visible humor, the most vital seeming one. So if someone had a fever or was agitated or had headaches, conditions they often link to too much blood.
Then removing some of that excess blood would restore the
Yeah, that
balance.
was the thinking. Exactly. Restore equilibrium. The lecture traces this practice way back, even to ancient Egypt, then Greece, Rome, and it just became incredibly widespread in medieval Europe and the Renaissance.
And Hippocrates himself suggested it.
He did, according to the lecture. He saw it as a tool to correct these humoral imbalances, especially when too much blood was suspected for things like fevers, inflammation, even mental disturbances.
Then along came Galen, the Roman physician. The lecture positions him as a major proponent, right?
Huge influence. Galen really integrated humoral theory deeply into Roman medicine and was a strong advocate for bloodletting. He didn't just say bleed them, he developed it further.
How so?
He apparently prescribed how much blood to remove for different ailments based on the patient, the season, the specific imbalance he diagnosed. This added layer of complexity and seeming precision probably made it even more convincing to people at the time.
Right. It sounds more scientific if you specify amounts.
Hmm.
And the methods. The lecture mentioned leeches, cupping.
Yeah, the techniques were varied. Leeches were quite common. Just apply them, they latch on, draw a controlled amount of blood. Then there was cupping.
How did that work?
You'd heat a cup, place it on the skin. As it cooled, it created a vacuum. sucking the skin up, drawing blood to the surface. Sometimes they'd make small cuts first or after to let the pooled blood out.
Okay.
And then scarification, which was basically making small, shallow cuts with a sharp tool, like a lancet, directly into a vein or just on the skin to let blood flow out.
Sounds intense. And often done by barbers.
Yes, especially in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. The barber surgeon was a common figure. It shows just how routine this was. Not some rare, drastic measure, but a standard procedure for almost anything. Headaches, fevers, infections, melancholy, you name it, bloodletting was probably tried.
Wow. So this incredibly widespread practice, based on this ancient theory, when did people start to seriously question it? The lecture points to the 18th and 19th centuries.
That's right. Cracks really started appearing then, largely thanks to the scientific revolution taking root. People began thinking differently about the body.
More mechanically.
Man,
Less humorally.
exactly. More emphasis on observation, experimentation, anatomy, physiology. As we learned more about how the body actually worked, the four humors theory started looking, well, less plausible.
And William Harvey's discovery about blood circulation, that must have been a big blow. When was that?
Early 17th century, and yes, absolutely pivotal, as the lecture highlights. Harvey showed blood wasn't just sitting in pools, potentially in excess. It
Yeah.
circulated continuously.
Which completely undermines the idea of needing to drain off a local excess.
Right. If it's all moving in a closed loop, where's the excess to remove? It fundamentally challenged the rationale.
But it didn't stop the practice immediately.
No, tradition is powerful. And, frankly, what were the alternatives? Medicine was still very limited, but the intellectual foundation was crumbling.
Then came germ theory. Pasteur, Koch. The lecture credits them with shifting focus entirely.
That was probably the final nail in the coffin for humoral theory. Suddenly you have microorganisms, germs, identified as the cause of many infectious diseases. It wasn't about internal balance anymore, but about external invaders.
A totally different way of thinking about illness.
Completely. It offered a new, evidence-based explanation that just fit the facts better for a lot of conditions. Bloodletting had no place in that model.
Yet the lecture notes it persisted into the 19th century. Why the lag?
Inertia, I think. Doctors were trained at it. Patients expected it sometimes. Plus, as mentioned, a lack of truly effective alternative treatments for many things. It took time, and vocal critics within medicine itself.
Like who? The lecturer mentioned a couple of names.
Yes, figures like Thomas Sydenham earlier on and later John Hunter started pushing back more strongly, questioning its effectiveness, highlighting the harm it could do. Eventually, by the mid to late 1800s, the scientific evidence and the shift in thinking became overwhelming, and the practice finally, largely, declined in mainstream medicine.
It's quite a story, such a dominant practice fading away. Does it have any legacy today besides being a historical curiosity? The lecture touched on this.
It does, in a couple of ways. Obviously, it lives on in our imagination and historical dramas and so on. But interestingly, leeches are still used medically today
Really? For what?
in very specific situations, mostly microsurgery, like reattaching a finger or an ear. Leeches can help restore blood flow and prevent clotting in tiny, delicate vessels. It's based on the anticoagulant properties of their saliva, a very specific, understood mechanism, nothing to do with balancing humors.
Okay, that's fascinating. A modern, targeted use for an ancient tool.
Mm-hmm. And the other legacy, as we touched on earlier, is that idea of temperaments. The four humors theory as a biological concept is dead, but the psychological categories it spawned, sanguine, choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic, they still pop up in discussions about personality.
So the framework kind of outlived the faulty science behind it.
In a way, yes. It suggests maybe there's something intuitive about grouping personalities into these broad types, even if the original explanation was wrong.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's really a stark reminder of how medical understanding evolves, isn't it? Bloodletting and the four humors ruled for so long, based on a theory that seems almost unbelievable to us now.
Absolutely. The lecture really drives home that point. It's a powerful case study in how scientific ideas are proposed, accepted, sometimes deeply entrenched, and then eventually overturned by new evidence, new paradigms, like the shift from humors to germ theory.
It makes you think, doesn't it? What current medical beliefs or practices, things we take completely for granted today, might future generations look back on with similar bemusement or even disbelief?
That's always the provocative question, isn't it? What are our modern-day humors? It's definitely food for thought.
Indeed. Well, thanks for digging into this with me. It's been a truly revealing look at a strange chapter in medical history.